No, I'm just making observation. I've got a few questions as well. But the thing is,
Mhm.
so you're saying that it's a good experiment you've done. So basically, you are
Mhm.
testing ChatGPT's answer itself and then rating it on a sentiment analysis, scoring, right, which is like 0 to 10.
Yeah,
So
right,
so you're doing that and then kind of
right.
seeing where it falls. And most of the time, you're saying it falls around 5. But what about the questions you asked it? Like, is it bias? Is the questions themselves kind of neutral, or like? Would you ask
Yeah,
something, saying something biased itself, like, what do a majoritarian population in India think
yeah,
about something like this? Is that kind of, I mean, what kind
yeah.
of questions do you ask it?
Yeah, so that is a very good question that you asked. So actually, I have asked all kinds of questions. Like I have deliberately introduced bias in my questions. In one set of questions, I have introduced negative bias. In other set of questions, I have introduced positive bias. And there are some questions in which I have kept the questions very open-ended and very neutral in a way. Like I will give you one example. So
Please
I
do.
one of the questions was examine the impact of AI on society. So or the question could be discuss the impact of AI on society. It is a very open-ended question, and when I did sentiment analysis of this sentence, it was giving me around 5. It was a very neutral kind of statement. Examine the impact of AI on society. However, the responses that you get from ChatGPT, they could be biased or sometimes they could be neutral. And if you replace this question with a biased question, for instance, you ask ChatGPT how bad or how evil is AI for society. Now you have introduced a bias in the question, so it will uh, it will there is a very high possibility that ChatGPT will add its own bias also, its own algorithmic bias. So this is what I'm calling bias amplification. And bias amplification has been observed in some of the cases that I have been
I
experimenting
mean,
with.
some of the cases within ChatGPT or some other, because I mean, there's a definitional issue in terms of ChatGPT. You said is a little more neutral, which is good, but you also talked about how there's other discriminative AI. Like, what do you mean by discriminative AI, or do you have examples of discriminative AI? And I think Rajeshwari also has a follow-up question, so I'll maybe you
Yeah,
answer
so
this and then she can.
basically, discriminative AI could be like whether you are wanting to classify, for instance, MRI images into healthy and with tumor. So discriminative AI, the old AI that we were using, it was using classifiers. So it would classify, uh, it would learn what healthy brain looks like, and it will also learn what an unhealthy brain looks like, and it will classify when you show AI that image of a particular brain of a patient, it will tell whether that brain is healthy or whether that brain is unhealthy. So it is giving you either or, like it is classifying in that way. Another example could be the crime mapping analytics software that India uses. Delhi police uses that software. So they also classify various districts of Delhi, and they put it into various classes, like particular districts are more vulnerable to crime, then some districts are like green, they don't have crime, and some districts are having very high crime probability. So the crime mapping analytics system, that is an example of discriminative AI because it is classifying. However, generative AI doesn't do classification. ChatGPT is not only doing classification, it is doing a lot of other things, and it is actually giving you uh, a very legible, a very credible response. It gives you the response. It is not giving you options in a way, like it is not
So,
classifying.
mm, so yeah,
So
you're making
that
a good
is
point. So can I rephrase that? Like, I mean, can I just summarize what you said? So basically, what you're
yeah,
saying is
sure.
that for the classical kind of AI, you can't even call it AI. It's more like the classical algorithmic systems, right? Basically, they kind of
Mhm.
learn and put it into categories, right? So it's categorical kind of
Right,
classifications that they do. But
right,
while the new ones that you're
right,
saying,
right.
because they're I mean, generative as such, because they're kind of
Generative.
predicting, right? They're predicting. So
Yeah,
you
they are
mean that they
predicting.
are
Yeah.
trying to be a little more balanced in terms of because they're also self-learning all the time and changing that the whatever is happening. So
Yeah,
they don't
yeah.
really put you in
No,
buckets.
no.
So they give you like a nuanced answer.
Right,
Is that
right,
right?
right.
Is that right?
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, right. You were able to distinguish between discriminative AI and generative AI.
Okay.
But I'm not saying that generative AI is giving neutral. I'm saying that I'm still experimenting with the Chat
Mm.
GPT, and in some cases I found that the responses were neutral, but
Mm.
in some cases the bias was actually magnified. So bias is still there, but the nature of bias has been changing. Like I actually found that the anti-minority bias was high in earlier AI, in the discriminative AI, which Delhi
Can
police
you
is
also
also
give
using
examples?
that.
No, that's a very good point. But can you
Yeah,
give an example like how did it appear?
basically it can become a little controversial, but yeah. So basically, for minority, I chose Muslim population in Delhi, but it is not that I'm using Muslims. Actually, it pertains to all minorities anywhere in the world. Like they could be Indians in America. Indians in America are a minority, and similarly, Muslims in Delhi, they are around 20%, so they constitute a minority. So that is why, since they constitute, they are underrepresented in the data sets, and
Yeah.
we have used the same data sets for training our
Mm.
algorithms. So
Mm.
perhaps that is why this anti-minority bias is coming in discriminative AI that we are using.
I mean, I mean,
Anshuman, I have a
yeah, go ahead.
question with regard to what you just shared about open-ended question that you asked AI.
Mhm,
You don't have to really answer
mhm,
it, but you can think through it. And it's just a. I was just curious when you said that it is a neutral question. You said that what is the
mhm.
impact of AI in society, right?
Yeah,
And
examine the impact.
examine the impact. So I was
Yeah.
just thinking that the word society itself, I mean, can we phrase it
Mhm,
as being neutral? Like, because it has different
mhm.
connotations at different contexts, right?
Right, right,
And
right.
AI also, for example, and like help me understand this, that when Chat GPT collates
Mhm,
this data from different sources, how
mhm,
this word society gets reflected in these sources and
mhm,
whose version of society it picks up, isn't
mhm.
that itself, like, that itself could be that some of those ways of looking at what society represents gets left out.
Right.
I'm just
Yeah,
thinking,
that is a
I'm
very
just
good point.
trying to understand that how this
Mhm.
works when we say
Right,
that
right.
it is giving a neutral, it's not so
Mhm,
biased, and what it is reflecting,
mhm,
you are giving it a score, you said objectively, which is 5. However,
mhm.
me, like I was just thinking that the word society itself is loaded, right? It's not like an
Right, right,
objective word.
right.
I also just add on because I think it's a very interesting point. So if you say, for example, right, if somebody in India is
Mhm,
chatting and saying Delhi society is peaceful, right? But that is actually
mhm.
underrepresentation of a minority which thinks that it's actually not peaceful, right? Or when they're not getting
Mhm.
what they want, like it's not fair. So it's
Yeah,
unfair.
right,
But then the system,
right.
if it says, I mean, sentiment analysis will say it's 5, which is kind of like a
Mhm,
good answer, just only because you're looking at it from the kind of adjectives you
mhm.
use, because it's not positive, it's
Right,
not negative, so it's neutral, right?
right,
So everything is okay,
right,
normal, like
right.
balance. But that could be for the majority view. It could not be for the minority view, right? But I mean, that can be ground for like interpretation errors are there with that point. Yeah.
Mhm.
No,
Right,
but we're also trying to capture your
right.
expertise. So don't worry, we're not here
Yeah,
to we're
yeah.
not your
No, no, no,
PhD.
it's okay.
Uh, no, but I think it's just as academics,
Yeah,
we are just interested. No, but I was just going to go
right,
back
right,
to
right.
one important point you said, which you just said, right?
Mhm,
The old
mhm,
system was that 20% of the minority where say so for example it's a negative connotation if you have say Muslims in India. It's okay. I'm openly saying it because it's just evidence based, right? We're not saying anything
mhm,
biased, or I mean we're not saying anything that's not been said. It's already been said, right?
mhm,
So say the like say
mhm,
black like neighborhoods where there are black Americans, there's more
mhm.
crime. or like there's more, teenage pregnancies or something like that. All those negative things we can say, right? I mean, based on evidence that exists. So you're
Right.
saying that algorithmically that has been captured and then that's negative? But is it true as well? I
Yeah.
mean, that's another issue. And on the other hand, you're saying that algorithmic, I mean, the new AI based generative AI is a bit more nuanced about it. It's like it doesn't show you too many negative things. Is that what you're saying? I mean, like, so that part, I think maybe it's
No,
connected to Rajeshwari's
no,
point too,
no.
but like,
Mm, no. Actually, I'm not saying that generative AI reduces bias or,
okay.
generative AI is better. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the nature of bias has changed. And probably, the earlier, like certain biases were more dominant. Like I said, anti-minority bias, and I gave the
Mhm.
reasoning also, like the
Yeah.
data bias is there. So, and since now we are in the age of generative AI, we are in the age of, Chat GPT and all of this. So
Mhm.
the nature of bias itself is changing. And why I'm saying that, because, these days the companies, the engineers, they themselves code morality in the algorithms. It is called as coded morality bias. So they are themselves putting weights, they are assigning weights to certain factors and certain parameters and vectors that they use to train the algorithm, to how they write the code of the algorithm. So since we have come a long way, because this anti-minority bias thing has been happening in the US, in the UK, algorithms have been biased against black community, against women, against children, those who are underrepresented in the data sets. So now we have learned from our mistakes. That is why I'm saying that perhaps, this has become more complex, like how to even go about measuring the bias, because the weights they are assigning as per their own morality. Like most of these companies, they are driven by Americans, so they are themselves, white Americans, and they have their own morality. And sometimes the Open AI, this company, Open AI is sometimes you see in various journal articles that they are saying that Open AI has a left liberal kind of stand. So in a way, they are bringing their own kind of liberal or left liberal bias to the algorithm, which was earlier anti-minority. So which was earlier very you can say earlier it was biased, and now we are putting another layer of bias to counter the earlier bias. So but we are not sure whether it's working or not, because now we are getting different kinds of biases. Like some biases are getting amplified, and we are getting order effect bias is also there, the order in which you frame the prompts in chat gpt. So they will decide what kind of answer you get. So there are so many complexities that have come up now when you talk about generative AI.
Actually, I was talking to Prof. Sudeep about that too. So the weighting is, I think, a significant move for, say, generative AI. Like, I mean, the simple fact that you can say underrepresented community, even if the voice is low, right, or small, you try to give it a little more weight so
Mhm.
that it balances off the other side,
Mhm.
right? So that kind of
Yeah,
things are
right.
positive, but we don't know how it plays out because, as you rightly
Yeah,
mentioned, also, I mean, we also don't know because nobody's releasing the code, right? Because that's their what do you call that? That's their
yeah. But
copyright,
that
and then
is,
that's the money that they get
yeah,
from, right? Yeah. So we talked to
yeah,
some
yeah,
lawyers
yeah.
as well. The lawyers also told us about
Mhm.
the balance, the trade-off between their new technology, which is based on the code, and then the other side, which is
Mhm.
like they can't show this code, and then the other side, everybody's talking about equity, like social equity and like
Right,
economic equity, and that's not matching.
right.
And so that's when the government has to step
Mhm.
in for regulation, right? So I was going to get
Mhm.
into these questions with you in a bit, but before that, let's just quickly touch upon India. So you said, you rightly said, like women and say minorities is a big issue, say in the
Mhm.
West. What do you think are issues in India? I mean, we just identified basically, say, caste system, religious diversity,
Mhm.
socioeconomic
Mhm.
disparity, which is also kind of
Mhm.
that's universal, but like specific to India, it's more like caste and religion. And also,
Mm.
do you see any other factors like social factors that could affect India because of these biases, minorities being taken out or underrepresented? Because the content itself is also, like you said, the content is white. In India, it could be the content is Hindu or majoritarian or high caste or whatever it is, right? Like
Right.
we don't know what it is, but exactly we haven't identified, we haven't done
Right.
census yet, but we don't. So hopefully, I mean,
Mm.
you could give your views as well in terms of it could be an opinion. I mean, just feel free to just
Mhm.
brainstorm.
Yeah. So yeah, you rightly said that in India, the we can see so much of religious diversity, socio-economic diversity, and some communities are obviously underrepresented. And whether it's high caste versus the backward caste, and women, children, tribes. We have scheduled tribes also in our country. So yeah, so basically caste, gender, and religion. Yeah, these parameters are there. Based on these parameters, we can clearly see a trend. Like when I talk about predictive policing in India, so since the data itself, is so much biased against certain minorities, and we are using the same, data to train our algorithms, and there have been several studies like which talk about systemic bias, and the it is inbuilt. Some studies say that the bias is inbuilt in bureaucracy and in police bureaucracy and overall in the mindset in the society. So all that plays a very big role, and it somehow I think it magnifies. It keeps on. It goes in a loop. You can say it's like a positive feedback loop. So it keeps on amplifying, and same data keeps on going in the algorithms. The same data that we see on the internet. If we talk about social media, so social media these days, you know, we talk about Instagram, you talk about YouTube, and the way certain videos are getting amplified, and because the society is so much biased in a way, and the algorithm learns from the engagement that it gets, and by engagement I mean the number of likes, the number of comments, number of views. You add all these things. These are the segments of engagement. So it learns from engagement. So it keeps on happening. So yeah, this is just a comment that I'm giving you, just over the top comment, that it keeps amplifying, and it's like a positive feedback loop. And
Hmm.
similar thing I'm observing in Chat GPT also, because Chat GPT is itself learning from various websites and internet itself, because Chat GPT now learns from open internet, because now we have Chat GPT 4.0, the latest version of Chat GPT. It is picking up data from in real time from internet. So yeah, so biases are very complex, and it is difficult to say whether it is discriminating certain sections, because, as I told you, now we have coded morality inbuilt in generative AI, and the new algorithms that these companies are coming up with, the big tech companies. So they are bringing in their own morality, but then who is to govern? Everybody has their own morality, right? Because it's relative. Morality of Americans would be different. Morality of someone in Bangladesh or Pakistan would be different, and morality of Indians would be different. However, most of these algorithms are created in the West and with their own set of mindset. So, and some our Indian engineers are also working. Like these days, they are creating algorithms. So yeah, so it has become very difficult actually to say like how, to what extent these algorithms are biased now, and how, to what extent they are discriminating against certain sections.
Great, great. Yeah, thanks for that. So I just wanted to ask you quickly, right? Like, you earlier mentioned something, but that was the introduction. I cut you off. Sorry, but let me just repeat that because I caught it. Which was that you mentioned how human. I mean, we are also algorithms in a sense, right? And you mentioned that rightly at the beginning. And you said that how our human algorithms can kind of play a layer on top of this machine learning kind of machine, right? So maybe you just give me a comment about that, like I mean, or your reading, understanding about that, and then after that, can you just tell us also a little bit about the points that you're raising, but it's not really come out. So I want you to just brainstorm basically because it's not really true. Okay, I'll just give you I'll just give you the scenario. So basically, right now AI is being built by in English systems mainly from the US because that's like the place where innovation is like booming. But it's a matter of time before we have all this in regional languages, and also this is going to be pulled out direct, like exactly like you said, it's going to be pulled out from the internet. From basically like web scraping, right? So it's going to be scraped out of the web, and then that's going to be your formative kind of your material that it uses, right, for data representation. So that's the data that's going to be represented, and you're going to interact with that data as an individual, or I don't know, as a company, or as an organization, right? So that how do you see that playing out when that comes out? Do you see dangers, right? So that's the second part. And the third part is like in terms of in Indian context, connected to the second one is that how do you see that affecting because it's going to be coming from the mainstream, which means that people who are already digitally literate, the high caste or the high socioeconomic group that already has access to the internet, they will be dominating that space, right, in terms of content. And the right word that you used, I mean, I think the technical word you used was like coded Marathi. Is it coded Marathi or something like that? Like, so how is that going to play out?
Coded.
Yeah. How is that going to play out? Like, is that any of that going to be connected to our constitution or something that's like the key mission of the country itself, right? So just like three questions. I mean, just ask me if you miss out anything. I'll remind you.
Sure. So yeah, I will start from your first question. So basically, by human, I mean the cognitive biases that a human being possesses. That Daniel Kahneman has famously written this book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So when a human is thinking slowly, he's very analytical, and when the decision maker is making a decision under various constraints, then very fast. And what I have found through various literature surveys is that when we talk about Indian bureaucracy, so in when we talk about in Indian context, the policing context, so when a decision has to be taken on the ground, and when there are riots happening, and people are protesting, and the DCP in Delhi, Deputy Commissioner of Police, when they have to take a call, you know, and they have assistance from the CMAPS algorithm, crime mapping, analytics, and predictive system. This is the CMAPS is the algorithm that Delhi police is using these days to predict crime. So CMAPS is throwing all kinds of outputs, right? And the way DCP is interacting with CMAPS and how he is, actually reaching a conclusion and how he's making that final decision. So the cognitive bias of the person, of that police officer, will is interacting with the already embedded algorithmic bias. So in that way, I was saying human algorithm interaction bias. So in a way, through several literature surveys and several studies, they have pointed out that somehow many police officers who are working in Delhi, they might having an inbuilt, anti-minority bias. And the algorithm that we are using, the CMAPS algorithm. So I found actually like a correlation. So it is not a causation, but it's a correlation that CMAPS algorithm was actually over policing the minorities. So somehow it was actually biased against the minorities. So there was some kind of anti-minority bias in the algorithm. And when both of these interact together, so you get a hybrid bias kind of thing. and it tends to be more biased, against the minorities, and it goes against, as you rightly said, it goes against the fabric of our constitution, equality, justice,